Second example, Lactantius. And I have 2 paragraphs here. The first one sets up the second. I forgot to do some highlights, but I'll be able to do it anyway. If among the dead, who is so foolish as to worship them? If among the absent, then they are not to be worshipped. So he's speaking about the pagan gods. If they neither see our actions nor hear our prayers. But if the gods cannot be absent, for since they are divine, they see and hear all things in whatever part of the universe they are, it follows that images are superfluous, since the gods are everywhere present, and it is sufficient to invoke with prayer the names of those who hear us. But if they are present, they cannot fail to be at hand at their own images. It is entirely so, as the people imagine, that the spirits of the dead wander about the tombs and relics of their bodies, but after the deity has become to be near, there is no longer need of his statue. Notice that. Notice how Lactantius is saying, hey, if the gods are everywhere, if the gods are divine, they're everywhere. But if they're everywhere, then worshipping them through images is totally superfluous. That 100% violates, contradicts a Christian iconodulia concept, which acknowledges that God is everywhere, and yet not only that it's valid and good to venerate him through images, but that according to Second Nicaea, you cannot fail to do so. You cannot refuse to do so. You must do it if you encounter an icon. Whereas Lactantius, here he is saying, if the gods are everywhere, what's the point? Who cares? And he does, in fact, apply this to the Christian God. Apologies for the size of the text, but I'll read it anyway. And note also as well, this is actually the kind of argument that anarchonists make today as well. God's everywhere. I don't need to pray to an image of him. But also similar arguments employed with the prayers of the saints. Even ignoring the question of whether it's actually a sin or not, I don't need to pray to the saints. I can just pray directly to God. That's like the whole point. For I ask, if anyone should often contemplate the likeness of a man who is settled in a foreign land, that he may thus solace himself for him who is absent, would he also appear to be of a sound mind if, when the other had returned and was present, he should persevere in contemplating the likeness and prefer the enjoyment of it rather than the sight of the man himself? Assuredly not. For the likeness of a man appears to be necessary at the time when he is far away, and it will become superfluous when he is at hand. But in the case of God, whose spirit and influence are diffused everywhere and can never be absent, it is plain that an image is always superfluous. But they fear lest their religion should be altogether vain and empty. And notice this is the pagan rationale he's responding to here. Notice this. If they should see nothing present, which they may adore. Notice this. Not that the gods need somewhere to inhabit, but simply that they need to see something. They need to see something they need to adore. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? If you talk with an ortho. And therefore they set up images, and since these are representations of the dead, they resemble the dead, for they are entirely destitute of perception. But the image of the ever-living God ought to be living and imbued with perception. But if it received this name from resemblance, how can it be supposed that these images resemble God which have neither perception nor motion? Therefore the image of God is not that which is fashioned by the fingers of men out of stone or bronze or material, but man himself, since he has both perception and motion and performs many and great actions. Big problem Lactantius would have at the Second Council of Nicaea. Very big problem. First, he's saying, hey, God's everywhere, therefore images are totally superfluous. But also that the only real image of God is something that is actually with motion, something with sense and motion. A human. That's why humans are in the image of God, in the true sense. And honestly, I'd love to make some content on that because I do believe that the whole Old Testament concept of man being in the image of God is itself also an attack on the pagan idea of God's material images, which I think may actually be relevant to this debate. So I might explore that one day. But regardless, notice Lactantius, he is denying that a real image of God is something that is just made out of material. It has to be something that's living and sensible. That's a human. That a human is a true image of God. And such images that are without sense, that are crafted by men's hands, panel icons, anyone? They are superfluous at best, if not outright condemned by Lactantius. They're superfluous because God is already everywhere. And so therefore we don't need, why do we need to offer supplications to an image of an image through an image to him? It's totally not out there. It's totally superfluous at best. The only real response I can see to this is that, oh, well, no, he's he's only, these fathers are only with reference to divine worship, which we deny should be given images, which is very ad hoc. They don't actually give a distinction. None of these fathers that, oh, well, you can't give the highest honor or the image through images to God, but you can give a lesser kind of honor. That doesn't make sense. They actually use very generic terms for honoring. But also, even here for Lactantius, he's not even just talking about honoring. He's even talking about contemplating the likeness of an image. And he says that this is superfluous because God is everywhere and no image can actually well represent God. Iconodulia should have a problem with that. But yes, notice I'm borderline repeating myself at here. Lactantius's reasoning is something which is flatly denied by an iconodulic worldview. Iconodules think it's of no consequence that God is everywhere and that an image is without perception or motion, because nonetheless they can represent God, even if only to a very humble extent, still to an extent that the icon can become a means by which honor is passed to God. Whereas Lactantius is like, nah, that's not even an image of God. That's not worthy of anything. Yeah, there you go. So that's Lactantius, second example.